Fire in the west! The courthouse is in danger! Evacuate now!
Fire! Get out! The whole block's going up! What? Oh, God.
It is the evening of Sunday, October 8th, 1871, and Chicago has not seen rain in more than 3 months. The grass on the prairie south of the city has turned the colour of old paper. The wooden sidewalks creak under any weight. In the lumber yards along the south branch of the river, the stacked pine has dried so thoroughly that a man can snap a board across his knee like kindling. The pitch in the seams of the rooftops is soft to the touch. The shingles, most of them split cedar, have curled at the edges. Every fence post in the city is dry to its core. This is what the city is made of. 2/3 of Chicago, on this October evening, is built of wood. Not just the houses, the streets themselves, paved with pine blocks set into the dirt. The sidewalks raised above the mud on wooden planks. The bridges across the river, wooden. The grain elevators, the warehouses, the breweries, the stables, the fences between every yard, the privies behind every house, the sheds and lean-tos and chicken coops in every alley. Even the mansions of Wabash Avenue and Michigan Avenue, with their stone facades and their iron fencing, are wooden frames inside, with wooden floors and wooden roofs and wooden trim. The city has built itself in a single generation out of the forests of Wisconsin and Michigan, and the forests have come down the lake on schooners and gone up as houses, and the houses have multiplied faster than any city in the history of the continent. In 1840, Chicago had 4,000 people. Tonight, it has just over 300,000. It is the fastest growing city in the world. It is also a tinderbox. The wind has been wrong for weeks. It comes off the prairie from the southwest, hot and dry, and it does not let up. It rattles the loose boards of the boarding houses on the west side. It carries the smell of the stockyards north into the business district. It picks up grit from the unpaved streets and carries it into the eyes of the men walking home from the saloons. On the lake, the schooners ride low against a glassy water that hasn't been broken by a real squall in over a month. You should understand what kind of summer it has been. In the previous 3 months, the fire department has answered nearly 600 calls, most of them small. A chimney fire here, a stable fire there, a careless cigar in a hayloft. But the pattern is unmistakable, and the men who fight the fires know it. They are exhausted. The horses are exhausted. The hoses, the hand pumpers, the steamers, all of it is showing wear. There are 185 men in the entire Chicago Fire Department. They guard a city of 300,000. The department has 17 steam fire engines, 23 hose carts, and 4 hook and ladder trucks. That is the entire arsenal. The night before, on Saturday evening, October 7th, a fire broke out at the Lull and Holmes planing mill on the west side, near Canal and Van Buren. It was a wooden building filled with sawdust, wood shavings, and finished lumber. By the time the alarm reached the watchman, the building was gone. The fire ate through 4 city blocks before the department could contain it. It burned for 17 hours. By the time the last of it was put out on Sunday afternoon, the men of the department had been on the lines for nearly a full day. Their lungs were ruined with smoke. Their hands were raw from the hose couplings. Several of them had collapsed at the scene and been carried home in carts. When you light a match in a city, you depend on the men who put fires out being ready for the next one. On the evening of October 8th, those men are not ready. Some of them are still asleep. Some are eating their first hot meal in 2 days. The hose has not been recoiled on 3 of the steamers. The horses on Engine 6 have not been reshod since Friday. The watchman at the courthouse cupola, the highest point in the city, the man whose job is to scan the horizon for smoke, is a substitute. The regular man is at home, sick. His name is Matthias Schaffer, and he has been on duty for 16 hours. And he is squinting into the dusk through a brass spyglass that does not focus properly past 2 miles. A few blocks south of the planing mill that burned on Saturday, on a narrow west side street called Decoven, lives a family named O'Leary. They are Irish immigrants. The husband, Patrick, is a labourer. The wife, Catherine runs a small dairy out of the barn behind the house. They have 5 children. The barn houses 5 cows, a calf, a horse, and approximately 2 tons of hay laid in for the winter, along with several gallons of kerosene and a quantity of wood shavings used for bedding the animals. The barn is wooden. The hay is dry. The kerosene is in tin cans on a shelf above the manger. Tonight, the O'Learys have gone to bed early. Catherine has been ill. The neighbours next door, the McLaughlins, are throwing a small party for a relative just arrived from Ireland. There is a fiddle. There is dancing. There is, almost certainly, drinking. What happens next happens in the barn. But before we get there, you need to understand one thing about Catherine O'Leary that history has overlooked for a very long time. She did not start this fire. The story you grew up hearing, the cow and the lantern, the Irish woman milking late, the kick that knocked the lantern into the straw, that story was made up. It was invented by a Chicago Tribune reporter named Michael Ahern in the days after the fire, when the city was hungry for a villain and an immigrant Catholic woman made a convenient one. Ahern admitted the fabrication decades later, in 1893, in print. He said he made it up to give the story a hook. The cow, then he said, was a colourful detail. The newspaper editors loved it. The country loved it. The story spread across the continent within a week and never came back. Catherine O'Leary spent the rest of her life as the most hated woman in America. She gave one interview, ever.
I swear to you it wasn't my barn. The fire was already raging when I saw it. They blamed me, but I had nothing to do with it.
She told the truth, that she had been in bed when the fire started, that she had heard a commotion in the yard and rushed to the barn to find it already engulfed, that she did not know how it had begun. The interviewer wrote down her words and then printed the cow story anyway. She died in 1895 of pneumonia. Her obituary in the Chicago Tribune called her the woman whose cow started the Great Fire. So we will not say it was the cow. We will not say it was the lantern. We do not know how the fire started in the barn at 137 DeCoven Street on the evening of October 8th, 1871. We know only that it started there. We know it was burning by 20 minutes past 9. We know that one of the McLaughlin's party guests, a man named Daniel Sullivan, who would later be called Peg Leg Sullivan because of his wooden leg, and who would tell 3 different versions of his story in the following weeks, was sitting on the wooden sidewalk across the street when he saw flames in the barn. He shouted. He ran. The barn went up in less than 4 minutes. Now, the wind. The wind tonight is coming from the southwest at roughly 20 miles per hour, with gusts higher. It is not a hurricane wind. It is not even, by Chicago standards, a particularly bad wind. It is the kind of wind a Chicago resident in October would barely notice. But it is steady, and it is dry. And it is blowing directly from the O'Leary barn toward the heart of the city. If the wind had been from the north, the fire would have burned south into the prairie and exhausted itself in a few hundred acres of grass. If the wind had been from the east, the fire would have been pushed back into the river. If the wind had been from the west, the fire would have stayed on the west side and burned a few blocks before the river stopped it. The wind is from the southwest. The first alarm goes out at 21 minutes past 9. A neighbour named William Lee runs 3 blocks to a drugstore at the corner of Canalport and Halstead, where there is a fire alarm box. He pulls the lever. The signal goes to the courthouse, where a telegraph operator named William Brown receives it. Brown reads the signal. He converts it to a box number. He looks at the box number. He sends it to the wrong box. Box 342, where the alarm should have gone, would have routed the closest engines, Engine 6, Little Giant, and Engine 14, directly to DeCoven Street within 10 minutes. Brown sends the signal to Box 319 instead, more than a mile to the southwest, on the assumption that the watchman in the cupola has a better view of the actual fire location, and that he, Brown, will correct the call once the watchman calls down.
Fire in the west! The courthouse is in danger!
The watchman in the cupola is Matthias Schaffer, the man who has been on duty for 16 hours, the man with the spyglass that doesn't focus. Schaffer sees the smoke. He calls down a location. He calls down the wrong location. By the time the error is corrected, 25 minutes have passed. The barn is gone. The McLaughlin house next door is gone. 3 other houses on DeCoven are gone. The fire has reached the alley behind the street and is moving into a row of wooden sheds packed with coal and lumber. It is now 20 minutes to 10 on Sunday night. The Chicago fire has been burning for less than half an hour. The men of Engine 6 arrive at 20 minutes to 10 exhausted, with horses still tired from Saturday's blaze. They unspool their hoses. They connect to the hydrant. The pressure is weak. The city's water mains on the west side are old and undersized. The hose pumps a stream that reaches perhaps 30 feet. The flames are now reaching 150 feet into the sky. The captain of Engine 6 is a man named William Musham. He has been a firefighter in Chicago for 16 years. He has fought the largest blazes the city has ever seen. He looks at the wall of flame in front of him, and he says one sentence to his second-in-command, and the sentence is recorded in the official inquiry that would be held in the weeks to come. He says, "We are going to lose the West Side." He is wrong. They are going to lose more than that. By 10 o'clock, the fire has eaten the block. It has crossed Taylor Street. It has crossed Forker. It is moving north and east at the speed of a man walking briskly, and it is widening as it moves, the way a wound widens. Behind it, the houses are not standing in any recognizable form. They are not burned-out shells. They are not blackened frames. They are simply gone, reduced in the time it takes to light a pipe, to ash and the iron stoves that used to sit in their kitchens, glowing dull red in the dark. You are standing on the corner of Jefferson and Taylor. You can feel the heat from 2 blocks away. The wind off the prairie is pushing the fire toward you, but it is also pushing something else. A hailstorm of burning material. Shingles, ripped from rooftops by the updraft, sail through the air still flaming. Pieces of wooden fence, of clapboard siding, of barn roofing, all of it lifted on the column of hot air rising from the fire and carried forward, ahead of the flames themselves, like skirmishers thrown out by an army. The technical term for this is fire whirl. The men who survive tonight will not learn the term until later. Tonight they will simply call it what it looks like. They will call it the rain of fire. A burning shingle lands on the roof of a stable 2 blocks ahead of the main fire. The stable catches. The men inside, scrambling to free the horses, do not see it begin. By the time they smell smoke, the loft above them is a sheet of flame, and the ladder out is gone. The horses do not make it. The men make it, 2 of them, by smashing through the back wall with an axe. This is happening in 50 places at once. The fire is not a single front advancing. It is 100 fires leaping ahead of itself, igniting in places that were perfectly safe 90 seconds before. The fire department, with its 17 steam engines, is trying to fight a 100-headed thing. Engine 6 is on Jefferson Street, drawing water from a hydrant that is barely producing. The captain, Musham, has called for backup. Engines 5, 7 and 8 arrive within 20 minutes of each other. They form a line. They aim what water they have at the leading edge of the fire, hoping to slow it long enough for the residents of the next blocks to evacuate. It does not slow. A second-story window on a building on Clinton Street, well ahead of the main fire, simply explodes outward in a sheet of orange. The heat alone has been enough to ignite the curtains inside. Now, by the time anyone notices, the building is fully alight. The men of Engine 5 swing their hose to face it, and as they do, a burning beam from a building behind them collapses across the hose, severing it. They have one hose between 4 men. The fire moves past them.
Time to head home now.
But Mama, can't we stay?
Long day. Tavern was lively.
Look at the stars tonight. Yes, but time for bed.
See you tomorrow then.
You should know who is in the streets tonight. It is Sunday evening in a working-class neighborhood. The taverns are full. The McCormick Reaper Works has let out for the night, and the men are home with their families. Children, who have been kept indoors during the hot, dry afternoon, are out now in the cooler air. There is a wedding party 3 blocks east of the O'Leary barn, in a hall above a butcher shop. There is a Lutheran church service ending late on Canal Street. There is a man named John Colsart, 26 years old, walking home from his job as a pressman at the Chicago Tribune, who will spend the next 8 hours running through the streets shouting at strangers to leave their homes.
Fire! Get out! The whole block's going up! What? Oh, God. Run! Don't stop!
And who will save, by his own late account, somewhere between 40 and 60 lives that night, none of whom he will ever see again. Kolsat will be quoted in a newspaper account 3 weeks later. He will say only this: "I did what a man does." He will not give his name. The reporter will find it out from a neighbour. Kolsat goes back into the streets the next morning to look for his sister. He does not find her. He never finds her. The wind picks up. By 10:30, the southwest gusts are hitting 30 miles an hour. The fire, which had been advancing in a roughly oval pattern, begins to elongate. It stretches. The leading edge surges northeast toward the river. The trailing edge behind it is now a quarter-mile of pure flame, 3 stories tall in places, with no structure left inside it that could be identified as a building. In the cupola of the courthouse, 3 miles away, Matthias Schaffer is watching the column of smoke rise into the night sky and trying to understand what he is seeing. The fire is moving faster than any fire he has ever watched.
Down there!
He calls down corrections to the alarm operator below. He calls down the wrong corrections twice more. By the time the third correction reaches the engine companies, they no longer need to be told where the fire is. They can see it. The whole west side of Chicago is glowing. The reflection on the underside of the smoke clouds turns the sky an unnatural colour, a deep, rich orange, the colour of a forge. And people all over the city are coming out into their streets to look at the sky. In the Lakeview neighbourhood, 6 miles north, a woman wakes her husband and tells him to come to the window. They stand together for a long time. He says finally that someone is in trouble. He says they should pray for them. They go back to bed. He is the publisher of a small religious newspaper. His name is not recorded in any account of the fire. But his house, 6 miles north of where the fire is at this moment, will burn to the foundation by morning. He does not know this yet. The fire reaches the south branch of the Chicago River at approximately 11 o'clock. Now, the river. You need to understand the river. The Chicago River is not a river in the way most people think of rivers. It is a slow, dirty, industrial channel, narrow in most places, perhaps 200 feet across, choked with the traffic of a working port. On this Sunday night, the South Branch is lined with lumberyards, coal yards, gasworks, grain elevators, and shipyards. It is full of moored vessels, tugs, schooners, barges, lumber haulers. The water itself, in places, has a slick of oil and tar on its surface, runoff from the industries lining its banks. Every man who owns a building in Chicago believes the river will stop the fire. They have been told this for 20 years. The river is the fire break. The river has stopped every previous fire that approached it. The river is wide and the river is wet and the river will hold. The river does not hold. The first thing to ignite on the east side of the South Branch is a coal yard, a piece of burning debris, probably a shingle. Possibly a section of board fence is lifted by the updraft over the river and lands on a pile of bituminous coal stacked 12 feet high. Bituminous coal is rich in volatile compounds. It catches. Within 4 minutes, the entire coal yard is burning. Within 10, the warehouses behind it are alight. Within 15, the lumberyard next door has gone up, and a lumberyard fully stocked is not a building that burns. It is an explosion that takes 3 hours to finish. The fire has crossed the river. The men in the streets see this happen. They see the leap. They see the orange light blossom on the far bank, and they understand what it means before anyone says it. The river, which was supposed to stop the fire, is not going to stop the fire. The river is now a corridor, a wind tunnel, funneling flame and heat directly into the South Division. The South Division is the heart of Chicago. It is the business district. It is the courthouse. It is the Tribune, the courthouse. It is the Tribune building. It is the post office, the customs house, the great hotels, the Sherman House, the Tremont House, the Palmer House. It is the train depots. It is the Opera House. It is the Chamber of Commerce. It is everything the city has built to prove that Chicago is not a frontier town anymore. It is also, like everything else, mostly made of wood. The buildings that are not made of wood are made of stone facades over wooden frames, with wooden floors and wooden roofs. Several of the great buildings, the new courthouse, the Field, Leiter and Company store, the marble-fronted banks on LaSalle Street, have been advertised for years as fireproof. They have iron columns, they have stone exteriors, they have hollow tile floors. None of these structures has ever been tested at the temperatures that are now coming.
The fire's spreading! I have to warn them! Paul! The whole city's burning!
In the cupola of the courthouse, Matthias Schaffer rings the great bell. The courthouse bell is the largest in Chicago. It can be heard for 5 miles in any direction on a still night. Schaffer rings it, not as an alarm, the alarms have already gone out, but as a warning, a long, continuous toll that means the city itself is in danger. The sound rolls out across the South Division at 12 minutes past 11. People hear it and know. Some of them do not even need to look out their windows. The light coming through the curtains is orange. The sky outside is the colour of dawn. But it is midnight on a Sunday in October. They begin to leave their homes. You are now standing on Adams Street, just east of LaSalle. The time is 11:30. The fire is still on the west side of the river, but the wind is carrying embers across to your side, and you can see, far down the block, a small fire starting on the roof of a 4-story building. There is no fire engine here yet. The engines are still on the west side, fighting what cannot be fought. The building is the Chicago Times office. It will be the first major newspaper to burn. You walk east. A woman comes past you, going the other way. She is carrying a sewing machine. She has tied a rope around it and slung it across her back. She is walking, not running. Because the sewing machine is heavy, and because she is 45 years old, and because she does not yet understand that she is not going to save it. She will get 3 blocks east, and then she will set the sewing machine down on the sidewalk in front of a hotel, and she will sit down next to it on the curb, and the fire will reach her in approximately 40 minutes. She will leave the sewing machine and run. The sewing machine will be there in the morning. The hotel behind it will not.
Fire! The South Division is burning! Get to the river! Flee now! The flames are spreading fast! To the north! Save yourselves! Hurry! The whole city is at risk!
A man on horseback rides past going north, shouting that the river bridges are still open and that people should cross to the North Division while they can. He is a constable. He is doing this on his own initiative. No one has told him to do it. He will ride for the next 4 hours up and down the streets of the South Division, telling people to go north until his horse collapses and he continues on foot. He survives. His horse does not. The Sherman House Hotel at the corner of Clark and Randolph has 300 guests on this Sunday night. The night clerk, a man whose name is recorded only as Mr. Wright, begins going room to room at 11:15, knocking on every door. Most of the guests are already awake. They have heard the bell, they have seen the sky, they are dressing, packing what they can carry, asking whether the fire will reach the hotel. Mr. Wright tells every one of them the same thing. He says, "Take what you can hold in your hands. Leave everything else. Go east, toward the lake. Do not stop walking." The guests do as he says. The Sherman House is a stone building, 6 stories tall, considered one of the finest hotels in the western United States. It has been open for 15 years. It has hosted Abraham Lincoln. It has hosted Ulysses Grant. It has hosted Mark Twain. It will not exist in 7 hours. By midnight, the South Division is committed. The fire has crossed the river in 3 places. It is burning the gasworks on the south end of the district. It is burning the rail yards. It is moving up Clark Street, up LaSalle, up Wells. It is moving faster than men can walk away from it. People are abandoning carts and trunks in the streets because the carts and trunks have become impossible to push through the crowd, and the heat behind them is too much, and the only thing that matters now is east. East, east. Get to the lake, get to the water, get to anywhere the fire is not. There are 30,000 people on foot in the streets of the South Division at midnight. In the next 3 hours, that number will more than double. Somewhere in the press of bodies on State Street, a woman is carrying a child wrapped in a blanket. The blanket is wet. She has soaked it in a horse trough before she left her house. The child is 2 years old. The woman's name is recorded in a memoir written 10 years later by a man who saw her in the crowd. He says her name was Mary, and he says she told him, when he asked if she needed help, that she did not need help, only that someone should know where she was going. She was going, she said, to find her husband. Her husband was at work. Her husband was a printer at the Chicago Tribune, the Tribune building at the corner of Madison and Dearborn. A was at this moment a 4-story stone structure that the Tribune had advertised in print the previous week as absolutely fireproof. The man who saw Mary in the crowd would later write that he had pointed her toward Madison Street and told her to hurry. He would write that he never saw her again. He would not say what happened to her. He would say only that the Tribune building burned to the ground at 4 a.m, and that he had thought of her in the years that followed, every time he passed the corner where it used to stand. The wind shifts, slightly, just past midnight. It does not change direction, it only strengthens. The gusts are now coming in at 40 miles an hour. The column of flame above the South Division is being bent forward by the wind, and the burning material lifted from it is being thrown not just 1 or 2 blocks ahead, but 5, 6, 8 blocks. The fire is no longer advancing, it is jumping, and the place it is jumping toward, on the other side of the main branch of the Chicago River, is the North Division, where 120,000 people are still in their homes, and where most of them, at this moment, do not yet know that the river to their south is no longer something that will save them. It is 12:30 in the morning, Monday, October 9th. A man named Horace White, the editor of the Chicago Tribune, is standing on the corner of Michigan Avenue and Congress Street, watching his city burn. He has come from his home on the near north side, where his wife and children are now in a carriage heading for the lakefront. He has walked down through the South Division because he wanted to see, with his own eyes, what was happening to the building where he worked. He has seen it. He has seen the windows of the Tribune office glowing from inside. He has seen the marble facade beginning to crack from the heat. He has stopped a man running past him and asked what time it was, because his pocket watch has stopped and the man has told him it was midnight. Horace White will write, in an essay published 1 week later in the Cincinnati Commercial, the most quoted sentence ever produced about the Chicago fire. He will write, "The world has seen its London fire and its Moscow fire, but never before has it seen a fire which, in the same number of hours, destroyed so much property and made so many people homeless." He is, at the moment he stands on the corner, already composing the sentence in his head. He will lose his home. He will lose his office. He will lose everything in both of them. He will write the essay sitting at a borrowed desk in a borrowed office on borrowed paper in handwriting that the typesetters will struggle to read because his hands are still shaking from the smoke. The fire is now in 3 divisions of the city at once. The west side is still burning, though the leading edge has moved on. And what is left there is the slow secondary burn, the smouldering of foundations, the collapse of chimneys, the long, slow death of buildings that have already lost their roofs. The South Division is fully engaged. The flames have reached the courthouse square. The great bell that Matthias Schaffer rang at 11 o'clock has stopped ringing because Schaffer has come down from the cupola and run for his life, and the courthouse itself is now a hollow furnace, the iron of its dome glowing red from within, the wooden floors collapsing one by one into the basement, where the prisoners in the city jail have been released by their guards and told to run. They run. Some of them, anyway. Several do not. Several stand in the streets and watch the building burn because they have nowhere else to go. The North Division does not yet know what is coming. You should understand the geography. The Chicago River, in 1871, splits the city into 3 pieces. The South Branch and the North Branch meet at a point near where Wolf Point is today, and from there the main stem runs east into Lake Michigan. The South Division is south of the main stem and east of the South Branch. The North Division is north of the main stem. The West Division is west of both branches. 3 pieces of city divided by water, connected by bridges. There are perhaps a dozen bridges across the river system, all of them wooden. Several of them are already on fire. The bridges that are not on fire are jammed solid with people trying to cross, north, away from the South Division. Some of the bridges are jammed so tightly that men and women are climbing over the railings and dropping into the river below, 12 feet down into water that is thick with floating debris and burning oil. Some of them swim, some of them do not. A woman with 2 children clinging to her skirts is on the Rush Street Bridge at 1 in the morning. She has been trying to cross for 40 minutes. The crowd ahead of her is not moving. The crowd behind her is pushing. She can feel the heat of the South Division on her back, and she can see through the gaps in the crowd that the wooden planks of the bridge ahead of her have begun to smoke. She picks up both children. She climbs the railing. She jumps. She survives. The children survive. A boatman in a small skiff fishes them out of the river, 60 yards downstream. Sonny puts them on the north bank. He goes back for others. He pulls 14 people from the river that night, by his own count. His name is recorded in a list of commendations issued by the city 6 months later. He is identified only as Captain William Doyle of the tug Brunswick. He never gives an interview. He goes back to working tugs on the river within a week, and he works the same river for another 20 years, and he dies in 1893 of pneumonia. And his obituary in the Chicago Daily News does not mention the fire. The waterworks. You need to understand what happens to the waterworks. The Chicago Waterworks is on the north side, near the lake, at the corner of Pine Street and Chicago Avenue. It is a massive stone building with a tall stone tower, and inside it are the pumping engines that supply water to every hydrant in the city. If the waterworks goes, the hydrants go. The hoses go dry. The engines have nothing to pump. At 2:15 in the morning, a piece of burning timber is lifted from a building on the south bank of the main river, perhaps the Galena elevator, perhaps the lumber wharf next to it, and carried by the wind across the river and across the entire near north side. It is a piece of wood roughly the size of a man's arm. It is fully ablaze. It travels approximately 3/4 of a mile through the air. It lands on the wooden roof of the waterworks pumping station. The roof catches. The men inside the pumping station do not notice for several minutes. The roof is high above them. The noise of the engines drowns out the sound of fire above their heads. By the time someone smells smoke, by the time a man runs up the interior staircase to look, by the time he comes back down and shouts to the engineer that the roof is gone, by then the timbers above the pump engines are beginning to burn through, and burning material is starting to fall onto the engines themselves. The engineer, a man named Frank Joyce, does what any engineer would do. He shuts the engines down. He has to. If the burning roof collapses onto running engines, the pressure will rupture the boilers, and the explosion will take the entire building and everyone in it. He shuts them down at 2:30 in the morning. The hydrants of Chicago, all of them, in every division of the city, in every street where men are still trying to fight the fire, go dry within 90 seconds. This is the moment the fire wins. It is not a dramatic moment. There is no announcement. The men holding hoses simply feel the pressure die in their hands. The water dwindles to a trickle, then to a few drops, then to nothing. They look at their nozzles. They look at each other. They look at the wall of flame in front of them, and they understand, all of them at the same instant, in every part of the city, that there is no fighting this anymore. There is no slowing it. There is no holding it at any line, any street, any river, any open square. There is only the fire, and there is only what is left to burn, and the fire will keep going until it runs out of either. The men of the Chicago Fire Department drop their hoses in the street. Some of them stand there. Some of them sit down on the curbs. One man, the captain of Engine 11, a 53-year-old veteran named Dennis Sweeney, walks back to his engine, pats the lead horse on the neck, and begins to weep silently, leaning his forehead against the horse's flank in the middle of an empty street, while the building behind him collapses in a roar of sparks. Sweeney will rebuild the department after the fire. He will become the chief of the Chicago Fire Department in 1879, and he will hold that position for 22 years. He will modernize the city's firefighting capacity. He will introduce the high-pressure water system. He will train an entire generation of Chicago firemen. He will never speak publicly about that night on the curb. The fire is now in the North Division. It crossed the main branch of the river at multiple points between 1 and 2 in the morning. The first crossing was at State Street, where a burning piece of debris ignited a paint shop on the north bank. The second was near Rush Street, where a tug full of barrels of kerosene caught fire at its mooring, and the flames spread to a lumberyard on shore. The third, and the worst, was at the gasworks, where a tank ruptured at 1:45 and sent a fireball 300 feet into the air, igniting everything within a 4-block radius on the north side of the river. The North Division is residential. The North Division is where the wealthy live. Wabash Avenue, North Dearborn, the great mansions along the lake. They are here. So are the working-class neighbourhoods of Irish and German immigrants packed into the streets west of Clark, in the area that will later be known as Old Town. So are the churches, the Unity Church where Robert Collier is the pastor, St. On Michael's, the great German Catholic Church, the Newberry Library, the McCormick Mansion. So are 120,000 people asleep in their beds who do not know yet. Some of them know. The bell at the courthouse has been ringing all night before it stopped. The sky has been orange since 11. The wind has been carrying ash and burning material across the river for over an hour. There are people in the North Division who have been awake and watching since midnight, who have packed trunks and harnessed horses and stood in their front yards, ready. But there are also people who slept through it. There are people who took a sleeping draught at 9 in the evening because they had a headache. There are children who slept the deep sleep of children. There are old men who could not have heard the courthouse bell from their beds because they were already deaf. There are servants in the upper floors of mansions who did not have windows facing the south, who did not see the sky, who were not woken by their employers because their employers had already fled. These are the people the fire reaches first. A woman in a house on Erie Street wakes at 2:30 to the sound of her own bedroom curtains catching fire. The window is open because the night was warm. A piece of burning material has come through it and landed on the fabric. She is 41 years old. Her husband is in St. Louis on business. She has 3 children asleep on the floor below. She gets all 3 of them out. She does this by carrying the youngest, a 4-year-old, on her hip and dragging the older 2 by the wrist. She does this without shoes because there was no time. She does this in a nightgown because there was no time. She runs 4 blocks east toward the lake with her children, and she does not stop until she reaches the open ground of Lincoln Park, where she sits down on the grass and only then realizes that her feet are bleeding. Her name is recorded as Mrs. Aurelia King. She wrote a letter to her sister 3 weeks later describing what happened. The letter survives. It is in the archives of the Chicago History Museum. The letter does not describe the fire. It describes instead the moment in Lincoln Park, an hour after she had made it to safety, when her 4-year-old looked up at her and asked, very calmly, whether they were going to go home now. She wrote that she could not answer the child. She wrote that she sat on the grass and held the child against her and could not make any sound come out of her throat. She wrote that she understood, in that moment, that home was a word that had stopped meaning anything. The fire moves north through the residential blocks at a speed that no one, no engineer, no fire chief, no insurance adjuster, no historian afterward, will ever fully be able to explain. It is moving faster than the fire on the west side did. It is moving faster than the fire in the South Division did. The wind has not increased, but the fire has reached a kind of self-sustaining intensity, where the heat it generates is creating its own updrafts, and the updrafts are pulling fresh air in from the surrounding blocks, and the fresh air is feeding the flames, and the flames are expanding to consume it. The technical name for this, in the modern era, is firestorm. It is the same phenomenon that will destroy Hamburg in 1943 and Tokyo in 1945. In 1871, no one has a name for it. People only know that the fire is alive in a way they have not seen fire be alive before. They know that the air itself, in front of the fire, is too hot to breathe. They know that wooden buildings are catching from the radiant heat alone before the flames reach them, that a house can burst into flame on its own, with no spark, no ember, no contact, just because the house next door is already burning. They know that running is not always enough. A man on Clark Street, at 3 in the morning, sees a burning carriage horse galloping down the middle of the street. The horse is on fire. The carriage behind it is on fire. The driver is gone. The horse is running blind in a straight line, north. The man steps aside. The horse goes past him. It runs another 2 blocks before it falls. He writes about this 20 years later in a memoir. He writes that the horse did not scream. He writes that he had expected it to scream, and that the silence of the horse in the middle of all that noise was the thing he could not stop dreaming about for the rest of his life. In Lincoln Park, on the lakefront, the survivors are gathering. By 3 in the morning, there are perhaps 30,000 people on the grass and the sand. By 4, there are 60,000. They are bringing what they could carry: trunks, bedding, bird cages, pianos dragged on rollers. A man has brought a stuffed deer because it was the only thing in his front parlour he could lift alone. A woman has brought a wedding dress, still in its tissue paper, because it was her daughter's, and her daughter is not yet married, and she wanted her daughter to still have it. They sit on the grass, they sit on the sand, they sit at the edge of the lake with their feet in the water. The fire is behind them, less than half a mile away, and the heat is reaching them across that distance, and some of them have their backs turned to the fire because they cannot bear to watch it anymore. The lake itself is glowing orange, reflecting the sky. The wind is blowing the smoke north away from them. This is the only mercy they will get tonight. At 4:15, a couple sits down on the grass at the southern edge of Lincoln Park and looks back at what is happening. They are an older couple. The man is in his 60s. The woman is in her late 50s. They have been married 32 years. They have lived in Chicago since 1843, when there was almost nothing here. They have watched it become what it has become. They have raised their children in a wooden house on Cass Street, and the wooden house is gone now, and the street it stood on is gone now, and they are sitting on the grass at 4 a.m, watching the orange light flicker on the underside of a column of smoke that reaches higher than they can see. The man takes off his coat and puts it around the woman's shoulders. He says, "Well, we will start again." She does not answer him. She is crying without making any sound. He puts his arm around her. They sit there for a long time. The fire keeps burning. Dawn comes slowly on Monday, October 9th. The sun rises behind a wall of smoke so thick that the people on the lakeshore do not see it as a sun. They see instead a faint reddening of the sky to the east, a slow softening of the dark, and they understand only by the changing of the light that morning has come. The fire is still burning. It has been burning for 32 hours by the time the dawn arrives, and it shows no sign of stopping. The leading edge has moved north past Fullerton Avenue into the prairie at the city's edge, where there are fewer buildings to consume. But it is still burning everything behind it. The South Division is still burning. The North Division is still burning. The smoke column rises 6 miles into the sky and drifts east across Lake Michigan, and ships 40 miles out from shore will report that morning of an ashfall on their decks like grey snow. In Lincoln Park, the survivors wake to find themselves surrounded by strangers. They had been their neighbours yesterday. They had passed each other in the streets of the North Division for years. They had nodded at each other on the sidewalks, eaten in the same restaurants, attended the same churches. Now they are sitting on grass, in nightclothes, holding the few things they manage to carry, and they do not recognise each other. The faces are blackened with soot, the clothes are torn or burned, the eyes are red from the smoke and from not sleeping. People who have lived on the same block for 20 years pass within a foot of each other in the park, and do not know each other. A man walks through the crowd calling a name. He calls it for 2 hours. He does not find the person. He sits down on a trunk that is not his and puts his face in his hands. A child is wandering between the family groups, asking each one if they have seen her mother.
No,
She is
child.
perhaps 6
I'm
years
sorry.
old. She is wearing a single shoe. The other foot is bare. Several women try to take her in, to feed her, to hold her. She does not stay with any of them. She keeps walking. She is found in the late afternoon by a man who recognizes her, a butcher who used to deliver to her mother's house. He takes her home with him to the west side, to his own family, and they keep her for 9 days while inquiries are made. On the 10th day, an aunt arrives from Milwaukee. The mother is not found. The mother is never found. The child grows up in Milwaukee, marries a railroad clerk in 1888, has 4 children of her own, and lives until 1942. She never returns to Chicago. The fire stops on Tuesday morning. It stops because it begins to rain. The rain comes in from the northwest, the first real rain in 3 months, and it comes in slowly at first, a fine drizzle that does almost nothing, and then harder, a steady drumming on the smouldering ruins. And finally, by Tuesday afternoon, a real soaking rain that goes on for several hours, and that quenches the last of the active flames, and that turns the ash in every street of the burned districts into a thin grey paste. The fire does not stop because the men fought it. The fire does not stop because the city did anything to halt it. The fire stops because the weather, which had abandoned Chicago for 3 months, came back. The men who survive will say, for the rest of their lives, that the rain was an act of God. The men who survive will mostly not say what they mean by that. The numbers, when they're finally compiled, are these: 2,000 acres burned, more than 17,000 buildings destroyed, nearly 100,000 people made homeless out of a population of 300,000. The financial loss in 1871 dollars is estimated at $200 million, a sum so large at the time that the country has no real basis for comparison. Roughly a third of the city's total assessed valuation is gone. The dead are harder to count. The official count, issued by the city in the weeks afterward, is 300. This number is wrong. It is wrong by an amount no one will ever be able to fix. The bodies that were recovered intact were counted. The bodies that were partially recovered were counted sometimes, depending on what was left, and on whether anyone could identify them. The bodies that were reduced entirely to ash in the firestorms in the North Division were not counted because there was nothing to count. The people who fell from the bridges into the river and were carried out into the lake were not counted unless they washed back ashore. The people who died of exposure in Lincoln Park in the rain on Tuesday were not all counted. The people who died of their burns and their injuries in the days and weeks afterward in makeshift hospitals and in the homes of relatives in other cities were not all counted. Modern historians estimate the true figure at somewhere between 500 and 1,000. We do not know. We will not know. The unnamed dead. There is a man whose body is found on Wednesday morning in the basement of what used to be a saloon on Wells Street. He is sitting upright against the wall of the basement, his arms folded across his chest, as though he had decided to wait there. He is not burned. He died of smoke. He has no wallet, no papers, no identifying mark. He is buried 2 days later in a long trench at the city cemetery with 26 other bodies that no one has come to claim. There is a woman whose body is found in the ruins of a boarding house on Ohio Street. She is identifiable as a woman only by her hair, which is partially intact. There is nothing else of her. She is buried in the same trench. There is a child, perhaps 2 years old, perhaps 3, the medical examiner cannot tell, whose body is found wrapped in a wet blanket on the lakefront, 300 yards from the water. On the morning of October 10th, the blanket is the only thing not burned. The child is unrecognizable. The blanket is plain wool, of the kind sold in any dry goods store in the city. There is nothing in the blanket, no locket, no note, no name pinned to the cloth. The child is buried with the rest. These are 3. There are hundreds more. The ledgers of the city cemetery for the week of October 9th to October 16th, 1871, show entry after entry that reads only unknown. Pause. Mayor Roswell B. Mason issues a proclamation on Wednesday, October 11th. It is brief. It is printed on handset type in a temporary office because no functioning newspaper press exists yet in the city. It says that the public peace will be maintained, that looting will be prosecuted, that the relief of the suffering is the first duty of the city government. It places the city under the temporary command of Lieutenant General Philip Sheridan of the United States Army, who arrives that afternoon with a small detachment of regular troops to keep order. Sheridan walks the ruins of the South Division on the evening of October 11th. He is the man who burned the Shenandoah Valley in 1864. He is the man who supervised the destruction of Atlanta. He has seen burned cities before. He has caused burned cities before, and he knows what one looks like. He stops at one point at the corner of Madison and LaSalle, and he stands there for a long time without speaking. A reporter standing nearby asks him for his impression. Sheridan says only,
"In all the wars I've seen, nothing like this."
The aid begins to arrive almost immediately. Trains come in from Cincinnati, from St. Louis, from Detroit, from Milwaukee, from New York, from Boston. They carry food, clothing, blankets, money, doctors. The city of Cincinnati, where Horace White's essay will be published the following week, will send $300,000 in the first month. The City of New York will send nearly 500,000. London will send funds. Paris will send funds. Tokyo will send funds, a small amount, but the gesture is recorded, and the people of Chicago will remember it for 50 years. A relief organization is set up in the First Congregational Church on Washington Street, one of the few major buildings in the burn district that survived. It is run, at first, by volunteers. Within a week, it is feeding 60,000 people a day. By the end of October, more than 100,000 homeless residents have been housed in temporary shelters, wooden barracks thrown up at the edges of the burned districts, in churches and schools that survived, in the homes of relatives in other parts of the city or in nearby towns. The shelters are crude, the shelters leak, the shelters are cold, the shelters are not enough. That winter, the winter of 1871 to 1872, will be one of the coldest in Chicago's history. By December, the rebuilding has already begun. This is the part of the story that the city will choose to tell in the years afterward. This is the part the chambers of commerce and the boosters and the architects will repeat. Chicago, the legend will say, did not stop to mourn. Chicago picked itself up. Chicago rebuilt. Within a year of the fire, more than 300 new permanent buildings were under construction in the burned districts. Within 5 years, the central business district had been entirely rebuilt, this time in stone and brick and iron, with new ordinances banning wooden construction inside the city limits. Within 20 years, Chicago would host the world's Columbian Exposition, the largest world's fair the planet had ever seen, on land that had been ash in 1871. Within 30 years, the city would be twice the size it had been before the fire, and would be home to the first true skyscrapers, the steel-framed buildings that would transform the architecture of every major city on Earth. This is true. It is also not the whole truth. The people who lost everything that night were not the people who rebuilt the city. The men who built the new skyline of Chicago, the Burnhams and the Sullivans and the Adlers, the architects whose names are remembered, were already wealthy before the fire and were wealthier after. The land in the burned district was bought up, in many cases, by speculators who could afford to buy at the depressed prices of late 1871 and to hold until the values recovered. The working-class families who had lived in the wooden tenements of the West Side and the North Division did not, in most cases, get their homes back. They were displaced, pushed to the outer edges of the city, to the new neighborhoods that grew up beyond the old burned districts, to the towns along the rail lines that became in time the suburbs of Chicago. Many of them simply left. The 1880 census would show that more than 30,000 of the people who had lived in Chicago on October 7, 1871, were no longer there. They had gone to St. Louis, to Cincinnati, to Detroit. They had gone back to Ireland, back to Germany, back to Sweden. They had gone west to Iowa and Nebraska and Kansas, where the railroads were hiring and where the land was still cheap. They had taken with them whatever the fire had not taken, and they had not come back. Their names are not on the new buildings. Their names are not on the plaques. Their names are mostly not anywhere at all. The city was rebuilt. But the city that was rebuilt was not the same city that had burned. Catherine O'Leary, in her small wooden house on DeCoven Street, which in one of the strange accidents of the fire did not burn, because the wind had carried the flames away from the house and toward the city, lived for another 24 years. She refused, after the first interview, to speak to any reporter ever again. When journalists came to her door, she sent them away. When her neighbours asked her questions, she did not answer. She went to Mass at Holy Family Church on Sundays. She walked there and walked back. She did her shopping at the same butcher she had used before the fire. She raised her children. She buried her husband in 1894. She died in July of 1895 of acute pneumonia in the same house on DeCoven Street. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune came to the funeral. He wrote a short notice that ran on page 7 of the next morning's paper. He wrote that Mrs. O'Leary, the woman whose cow had started the Great Fire of 1871, had passed away at the age of approximately 68. He wrote that the cow had been long since dead and that the legend of the fire would now outlive both of them. He did not mention that the cow story was an invention. He did not mention that Michael Ahern, the reporter who had made it up, had publicly admitted 2 years before that he had made it up. He did not mention that Catherine O'Leary had spent the last quarter-century of her life in a kind of internal exile, marked by a story that was not true. He did not mention these things because they would not have helped sell newspapers. The cow story is still, today, the version most Americans know. There is a sewing machine, somewhere, in the basement of the Chicago History Museum. It was found, after the rain, and sitting upright on the sidewalk in front of the ruins of the Tremont House Hotel, exactly where the woman who was carrying it had set it down. The fire had burned around it. The wooden cabinet had burned away. The metal of the machine itself was warped and discolored, but the shape was still recognizable. The wheel, the needle housing, the foot pedal. No one came to claim it. It sat in a city storage building for 22 years before a curator catalogued it. The card in the catalogue says only, Singer Sewing Machine, recovered from State Street, October 1871, donor unknown. It is not on display. It has not been on display in over a century. It is in a wooden crate, on a shelf, in a temperature-controlled basement on the city's near North Side, 3 blocks from where the fire stopped. The woman who carried it does not have a name in the historical record. She is one of the unnamed dead. Or she is one of the survivors who simply went somewhere else and did not look back. We do not know which. The machine waited for her on the sidewalk. The machine is still waiting, in its crate in the basement of the museum. Horace White, in his essay published the week after the fire, will write a sentence that will be quoted often in the years to come, and that will be carved eventually on a small bronze plaque mounted on a stone monument near the lakefront. He will write that Chicago, before the fire, had believed itself to be permanent. He will write that this was the first lesson the fire taught. The wind off the prairie is still blowing tonight. It is October in Chicago, in any year you care to name. It comes in from the southwest, hot and dry in the late summer, cold and dry in the autumn, and it rattles the windows of the houses on the west side, and it carries the smell of the lake into the streets of the north side, and it picks up grit from the curbs and carries it away into the dark. The wooden city is gone. The pine block streets are gone. The lumber yards along the South Branch are gone. The buildings that stood on October 8th, 1871, are nearly all of them gone, and the ones that remain are very few and very small, and not in the places where the fire was worst. What replaced them is what we know now: the steel, the stone, the grid, the skyline. It is a city built in the shape of a promise that the fire would not come again. It is a beautiful city. It is a great city. It is one of the great cities of the world. It is also, us in the end, only a city. It is built by people. It is held up by their work and their patience and their belief that what they have made will last. The people of Chicago in 1871 had that same belief. They had built the fastest growing city in the world in a single generation out of the forest of the upper Midwest. And they had believed that what they had made would last. And they had been wrong.
The wind comes in from the southwest. It does not care what the city is made of. It does not care what we believe.